best bites forever.
Hey everyone, it's Chef Alicia, and today I am sharing my recipe for peach pie with a buttermilk crust. So let's get started with that crust. To begin, you'll need 2 1/4 cups of AP flour, which is all-purpose flour, along with 2 sticks of butter. And I like to slice my butter when I put it into my flour because it makes the job just a little bit easier. And then once you get the butter into the flour, take a pastry cutter like I have here, or you can use a fork if you don't happen to have one, and mash it in there until it looks like you have kind of like crumbs inside of your flour. So it's going to look just like this. Once you get to this texture, you're done mashing your butter and we're ready to add some buttermilk. Now I'm going to add my almond extract into my buttermilk so I don't end up with like a clump of just almond and the flavor's not nice and spread. So just add it into the buttermilk and then give it a little stir as carefully as possible inside that measuring cup, and go ahead and add it into your flour and butter mixture and stir that around. When you make a pie crust, it's really important to be able to look at the texture and tell if it's ready or not. So obviously by looking at this, it's not quite a crust and we need a little bit more buttermilk. So I'm going to add 3 more tablespoons of buttermilk, and you'll probably need to add these 3 more tablespoons too. And then give that a nice little stir. Once you get that stirred in, if it's not coming together into one ball, then you need more buttermilk. So if you live, out in the desert like I do, you're more than likely going to need these 2 more tablespoons. But if you happen to live somewhere moist like Florida, for instance, you may not need these last 2 tablespoons. It just kind of depends on the pie crust, because every baker knows that pastries are temperamental and that's just what it is. So if you need those other 2 tablespoons, add them in, and if you don't, then don't. No big deal. But what you're looking for is for the dough to come together, like I said, into like one big ball, so like one big happy pie crust clump, which is what I have here. And now we're going to move over to my counter. So a nice floured surface is what you need to roll out a pie crust. And I'm just going to give you a really quick kind of brief overview of how to roll out your pie crust, and you can do this at home. And by the way, you can also use a store-bought crust for this if you want to, but it's not going to be, the buttermilk and almond extract. So here I'm just cutting it not quite in half because I need more for my bottom crust than I do for my top, because we're going to do a lattice crust, and it doesn't take as much to do lattice as it does to do, the regular whole pie crust on the bottom. So the first thing that you need to do here is to get your crust into a nice little disc, like a little circle, because obviously you want it to be a circle if you're making a circle-shaped pie, so it's easier to start with a circle. And then you always roll from the center to the edges. So you do like a little plus sign to start. So I went from the center up, the center down, and then the center to the right, the center to the left, and now I'm doing like a little X. So from the center up to the top right, from the center to the bottom left, and so on and so forth, like a little X. Also notice I don't roll over my edges, I only go to the edges. Otherwise you end up with teeny little thin edges on the edge of your crust, and it's not going to be good for your final result. Then roll your crust up onto your rolling pin and just move it over to the pie pan. Put it down inside of it and get rid of any little pockets that you have, and dock your crust, which I didn't show on here, but that just basically means poke it with a fork so you have bunches of holes so it doesn't poof up in the oven. Now I've moved on to my peaches here, and to peel my peaches I'm going to blanch them. So you start off by cutting a little X into the bottom of each one of your peaches. Once you have a little X, then move it into a pan of rapidly boiling water, and you're going to let them be in there for right around 30 seconds, and then move them into an ice bath to stop them from cooking, because we're not trying to cook our peaches, we just want the peels to come off easily. You also have the option here of using a veggie peeler or a knife to peel your peaches, but I personally like to do it this way because I think that it's a little bit faster, at least for me, and also it gives a nice clean peel off of your peaches and you don't lose any of that nice peach flesh. So you can see here that I'm peeling my peaches and that peel just comes right off super easy, and it's not taking any of the part of the peach that I want to use for my pie, so I'm not losing anything here either. I am going to go ahead and peel all of my peaches. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I have 9 peaches here, so just go ahead and remove the peels from all of your peaches, and then we're going to slice them up. So I just pick it up and take my knife and kind of push it around the edge of the knife. But one thing to keep in mind here is it's going to be really slippery because it probably cooked a teeny bit on the outside and they just get slippery. So if you're not comfortable doing it this way, then keep it set on your cutting board if you need to. And again, if you're just not comfortable, you can always use the veggie peeler. Remove the pit, and I'd like to point out here that these are non-cling peaches. You want to ask your produce manager if you have cling peaches or non-cling, and that just basically means does it hold on to its pit or not. And here's how thick I'm slicing these. It's about 1/4 inch or so thick. Better for you to go a little more thick than too thin. So there are my sliced peaches, and you want to end up with between 5 and 6 cups. And now we're going to make our filling. So I'm using 1 cup of sugar, 3/4 of a teaspoon of cardamom, 1/2 of a cup of cornstarch, and 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. And just as a side note here, if you did not make your crust homemade, which again is fine, but you're going to want to add that 1 teaspoon of the almond extract straight into your peaches because that flavor is a really important component of this pie. Once I get my cornstarch mixture nice and stirred up, I'm going to sprinkle it over the peaches and just stir it so that the peaches are nice and evenly coated, and they're going to look something like this. And then we're going to move on to our top crust, but we're going to do this in fast forward. So here I don't need a circle, so I'm just rolling up and down, side to side, because it's fine if I end up with a rectangle. And we're going to then cut this in strips. You can use a pizza cutter or you can use a pastry cutter depending on what you happen to have in the house. Then your docked pie crust is hanging out waiting for you, right? So pour your peach filling in, and then those little blobs that you see in there of white kind of yellow color, those are just little chunks of butter. So I took 2 tablespoons of butter and kind of broke it up and put it on top because butter is delicious. So now I'm just working on my lattice for the top crust, and I'm going to do half of this for you so you can kind of get an idea of how to do the lattice crust. If you have never done a lattice crust, don't be intimidated because they're really not hard to do. You just kind of have to pay attention to what you're doing, and it's kind of like weaving, except I guess a little bit easier. Just look at what you're doing, you lift the ones that you need out of the way, and you add the strips as you work your way down the pie. This pie filling is also really spectacular with a crumb topping. If you're a fan of the crumb toppings, then I would recommend that you give that a try, you know, one of the times that you make this, because hopefully you'll end up making it more than once. I make a couple of these over the summer because, you know, my family loves peach pie, and we have a big family anyway, so we eat tons of pie and baked goods. I like to cook, what can I say? So anyway, once you get to this point, you just roll up the crust on the edges and see, you kind of put your finger and squish the pie crust over to the edge to get that fancy little frilly siding. And then I'm going to use a brush to apply an egg wash, and then I'm going to sprinkle that with a little bit of sugar. Bake it in your oven at 350 degrees until it's golden. It's going to take right around an hour, and then make sure you let it cool for at least 4 hours before you cut it up. If you don't, it's going to just run everywhere. If you would like this recipe or any of my others, you can visit my website, bestbitesforever.com. Thanks for watching, and happy cooking, everyone.
bestbitesforever.com